Hello and welcome to another SonicLAB. Today we're looking at the brand new well, not so brand new, quite new, Teenage Engineering Medieval. I suppose you could say really old if it's medieval, but no, it's not. This is the new kind of companion piece for the original KO2, which I have here and have reviewed elsewhere on the channel, which you can see. Now, what's the difference? Well, the medieval sort of came along out of nowhere, really, as a really wacky idea. Came with this lovely box, as is their usual packaging. And I must admit, when I first saw it announced, the world's first medieval drop sampler sequencer just seemed like a crazy idea. In fact, it's so crazy that I was looking up on Google whether or not there was some kind of April Fool type jestery funny event that Sweden had in July or August that meant, you know, this was all part of just one big joke. Actually, it's not. And so here it is. I mean, it is here in person. It's exactly the same in terms of hardware. Obviously, the livery is different as the KO2, which as I said, I've reviewed elsewhere. Well worth checking out for a full functionality. I'm not going to go through every single function again. I'm just going to kind of highlight what the differences are. So, what is a medieval sampler? Interesting thought, isn't it? Well, let's start because this actually has some demos. It's full of medieval sounds. So let's try, let's just play this one, see what happens. Okay. Sort of hurdy-gurdy, trumpets, crowd noise, maybe a jousting match or some sort of pageant. Kind of bonkers, really. One of my favourites is this one. This is very doomy. This is more your kind of monastic, I don't know, sort of dodgy monastic behaviour. I mean, it's quite filmic, isn't it? There are more. Let's have a look at this one. 7. We got 9 demos, like there are 9 songs. Forsooth. So essentially, it's full of those kind of sounds, and there's a whole bunch. There's sort of plucked instruments. There's sword fights. In fact, it's this. There are a load of really witchy chicken. Yeah, I'm not sure how useful these would be. And I suppose this makes the whole thing sort of harder to take seriously because, I mean, how many of us are going to be using that stuff in our everyday lives? But more on to the differences. So obviously, as we can see, I think the reason this took hold is they probably found an LCD that had this kind of script to it, because obviously you can see it's very different to this one. So the idea being, you know, that's half the battle, really, isn't it? You know, and there are differences with the graphics as well. You can see there that these, you can see they're sort of castellated. There's lots of kind of medieval gags. All the legend is sort of faux-Latin. I don't think it's all real Latin. I think some of it is, some of it isn't. This is slightly darker than this guy. Now, one really peculiar thing that came up was the buttons smell of chocolate. Now, I've got to check this, so I can say no, the buttons do not smell of chocolate. I think maybe what happened is some small child came along who'd been eating chocolate in the house of somebody who owned one of these and maybe touched a few buttons and then it smelled of chocolate. Just because they're brown does not mean they smell of chocolate or anything else that might be brown. It's just a bit of a myth. But as you can see, they've taken the medieval thing to the sort of max. Now, the really big difference is the medieval has 128 megabytes of storage on board. The original KO, had only 64. So you're probably thinking, ooh, does that mean I could just get rid of all the medieval sounds and maybe put 128 megs of my own sounds in? Sadly, it does not. They are read-only memory, and so you only actually get an additional 32 megs of user samples. Same conditions apply, up to 20 seconds, and I believe, yes, mono or stereo. So, you know, there are the same limitations. Speaking of the similarities, we also have the same groups. Each group has 12 pads. Each pad is a track that can either be a single one hit, or if you press claves, which is just the same as key, you can play sequences and pitch sequences. It's the same when it comes to the MIDI as well. The MIDI works in the same way, so you can record quite a lot of MIDI into these and send them out to external instruments because we have the same output. That's the output, that's the input, sync IO, MIDI IO, exactly the same scenario. This will also talk to a version of the online tool where you can drop your samples in there and back them up. So, as I was saying, each group, you have a pattern. You can have 99 patterns in each group, up to 99, and each pattern can be up to 99 bars. So you can record an awful lot of stuff in here. We've also got effects and we've got insert effects. These are all the same thing. Biggest UI difference, I think, is the fact that on the left-hand side version, we have these indicators which show what the current parameters are set to. So we can kind of, you know, if we go to one of the effects, we can turn it to delay, we get feedback and length, and it gives us an idea of what those values are. There's no such thing on this one, so if I turn these knobs, it does say what the parameter is, but it doesn't give you an idea of what actually happens in terms of the parameter. So I think that one is, it may seem like a small thing, but actually it's really handy when you're operating this machine to sort of know what the values are and where you are when you're turning. Back to the structure, yes, same 9 songs, everything else is kind of pretty much the same. There are some other differences, and that's to do with more of the effects. But I did program something in here which may indicate something, well, marginally more contemporary than what you've heard. I'll play it now and see what you think. I thought this was... Let's go to the effect. Let's go to the output. With the same compressor on the output. So I called that, it was a bit like a sort of Massive Attack riff, so I called it Trebuchet Attack in a rather moment of amazing witticism and an attempt to make some sort of medieval gag. Okay, I apologise up front. So, what else have we got going on here? That's interesting, the effects are slightly different, and there are a few other bits and pieces that I will attempt to demonstrate. But before I get to that, there's a difference between what the samples are, and this would be something that would be really nice to see them bring over to the KO2. When you load the samples in the editor, or the web editor, you can see that in the medieval, there are loop points. There are actually sounds which are looped. So I think this one, for instance, is actually properly looped. Rather than sort of rhythmically looped, it's got a crossfade loop on it, and that means that you can play more pitched instruments. Additionally, there are kind of samples which have regions within them when you see them in the editor, which sort of show what note each one is sampled. So when you go from this mode to a sort of a played mode, each of these sounds, they're not stretched, they're sort of multi-sampled across those 12 pads, or further if you've got a MIDI keyboard attached. That's something that's not available in the original KO2. Be nice to see that, wouldn't it, if we could actually get some proper sample looping in there. That would be pretty cool, but, you know, I'm reviewing the medieval, aren't I? So let's just have a quick spin through some of the rhythm sounds, perhaps, because there are a bunch of samples in here. Starting off with a kind of drum, various different sorts of kind of fuddy percussion, tambourines, drum rim, bells. Then we get into the more sort of medieval kind of sounds. Some of them are quite nice, actually. Got a sort of good bit of ambience around them. Then we're into these sort of hurdy-gurdy trumpets. Jaws harp, plucked instruments. There's a whole bunch in here that kind of, you know, fit the medieval bill, really. So let's get into some of these effects. And what I've done here is I've got, we need to go to the output, sorry, not the output, to the input, because I think that's a bit hot. So I'm coming out of here into here. So let's just make sure I've got no effects, turn the effects off on it. And then in this one, I can send this into the internal effects. So at the moment, the effects are set to reverb. Let's go back a few. Off, obviously. Chorus. Well, actually, that's not chorus, it's echo, isn't it? And it's a sort of... It's like a early reflection repeat. That's as fast as it goes. It sounds like a sort of crappy reverb, but it's not. It's a bit different to that. And just to show you that the only thing I would say is this one, if I turn this down, hold on, I need to come back here and take the input. On this guy, we can go to really quite interesting and creative effects with sort of almost carpler strong. Turn that off. So, not so in the echo. Right, then we've got reverb. This is actually much the same. Speaking of reverbs, I will plug our Patreon here. We've started to put some impulse responses from some interesting reverbs. I've just got a bunch of ones ready from the classic Alesis MIDI Verb 2. I can run some IR responses through the reverbs on these as well, so you can have those too. I'll put them on the Patreon, but I digress. So reverb, same sort of thing. Quite a nice reverb, very similar to this one as far as I can tell. Then we've got distortion, which is the same. Then we've got an ensemble effect. Let's try a bass through that. If we come back here and turn the... Let's go back. Get a bit of a wobble. Let's... Quite an interesting sort of gurning effect. Maybe works better for some of these drone sounds. Then we've got filter, which I believe is the same. Compressor. This feels much more, you can have everything here. This seems more vicious than the one in here. I'm going to just go to the one in this guy, just to compare them. No, I don't know. This one just seems noisier, doesn't it? I don't know where that noise is coming from. Is it coming from the input? Yes, so it may be just that this is a bit too noisy, but it's similar compressor as well. Then we've got dim, which is like dimension. And this is like, it reminds me of the classic 80s effect, which is dimension D, which is almost like a fixed chorus. So you end up with a sort of spread and a stereo image with a sort of certain amount of delay and feedback. So we've got seems to be suited to making a stereo image, and that's it. Now, you know, nice to have those extra effects. In fact, the first thing that comes to mind is, can we have them in the KO2 as well, please? Because just the slight difference in possibilities would make the KO2 more interesting in terms of a sample machine. I mean, I suppose, I don't know whether or not, you know, you could just add them, because you can only have one at a time, and it's a send effect effectively. So just having more algorithms on this menu, I can't see why that would be a problem unless there's an actual physical reason why you just can't get any more algorithm code in there. Anyway, that's by the by. So coming back to my delightful, let's go back to reverb. Go to my fader, this is just the same thing. Do that one and set the fader. I like that. I think that's my sort of groove. In fact, actually, if I turn all these down, check these out. So I think I can do it this way. What could you use it for? This reminds me a little bit of Snoop, medieval Snoop, Doggus Doggus, drop it like it's hot. Maybe not. Okay, so let's just switch all of these back up, get them all up to level. Maybe take this drive down a bit on the output. We've also got the insert effects, and the insert effects are a bit different. There's no bit reduction, which is a shame. So if I play this, what I really like is this. This is more like a sort of tremolo gated effect. Seems to be fixed to 16ths, but I really like that. It reminds me of what I might do to a drone like that. But this was a bit crush on this guy. Doesn't sound like it's the same thing. Different insert effects going on there as well. And I suppose, I wonder if there's a way that they could actually bring some, I like that sort of, that one really, I prefer that to the one on the KO2. I wonder if there would be a way that we could again sort of choose which ones we want on what. I suppose it would make the OS a bit more difficult. So, you know, I'm not sure whether we're going to get a kind of a blending of these different technologies. I mean, I think ultimately, you know, it's kind of a bit of fun, and I guess they probably had a laugh in the office, and fair play that they saw it through to the end. But this feels like a bit of a novelty when you take into consideration that you only actually get 32 megs of spare RAM that you can put your own samples in. I mean, how useful are medieval samples going to be in your everyday music creation? I think perhaps if you're you know, like the whimsical as a collectible item, maybe it has some value, but I still feel, to be honest, out of the two, this is probably the one I would spend my money on, because they are ultimately the same price. I don't see any absolute difference. And this one, as you in my original review, I really enjoyed. I found the creative process on it actually really empowering. So if we could have maybe sample looping and zone ranging for multi-samples in the KO2 from the Medieval, then I'm really happy the Medieval exists. I think if you're buying it as your only KO and you want a drum machine, I don't think I'd go with this. Unless medieval music is your jam, yeah, you're probably, the joke might wear quite thin quite quickly. Anyway, like I say, I'm glad it exists. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time. Let me tell you about our Patreon. You get all of our reviews ad-free, so you don't have to put up with those pesky ads like this one. And also, we post extra content for many of our reviews. Never before seen footage from the archives. We've got 70 sounds and patches posts, 137 exclusive videos, a growing collection of impulse responses from classic reverbs, and 36 sets of samples from reviewed units, many in decent sampler format. In fact, the music you're listening to now was mostly made using our decent sampler and sample sets. So if you want to join us, head over to patreon.com/SonicState.